Dashrath was on horseback at the head of his troops. He ran his eyes over his men confidently. They were a rowdy, raucous bunch with swords drawn, eager for battle. The horses, too, seemed to have succumbed to the excitement of the moment, for the soldiers were pulling hard at their reins, holding them in check. Dashrath and his army could almost smell the blood that would soon be shed. The magnificent killings. They believed, as usual, that the goddess of victory was poised to bless them. Let the war drums roll. Dashrath squinted his eyes as he observed the Lankans and their commander, Raavan, up ahead in the distance. Molten rage was coursing through him. He drew his sword and held it aloft, and then bellowed the unmistakable war cry of his kingdom, Kosala, and its capital city, Ayodhya. Ayodhyata Vijetara, the conquerors from the unconquerable city. Not all in his army were citizens of Ayodhya, and yet they were proud to fight under the great Kosala banner. They echoed the war cry, Ayodhyata Vijetara. Dashrath roared as he brought his sword down and spurred his horse. Kill them all! No mercy! No mercy! Shouted the riders of the first charge, kicking their horses and taking off behind their fearless lord. But then it all began to unravel. Dashrath and his finest warriors comprised the sturdy tip of the Saptarshi Sindhu needle formation. As they charged down the beach towards the Lankans, Raavan's troops remained stationary. When the enemy cavalry was just a few hundred meters away, Raavan unexpectedly turned his horse around and retreated from the front lines, even as his soldiers held firm. This further infuriated Dashrath. He screamed loudly as he kicked his horse to gather speed, intending to mow down the Lankan front line and quickly reach Raavan. This was exactly what Raavan had envisaged. The Lankan front line roared stridently as the soldiers suddenly dropped their swords, bent, and picked up unnaturally long spears, almost 20 feet in length, that had been hitherto lying at their feet. Made of wood and metal, the spears were so heavy that it took 2 soldiers to pick each one up. The soldiers pointed these spears, tipped with sharp copper heads, directly at Dashrath's oncoming cavalry. The pointed heads tore into the unprepared horses and their mounted soldiers, even as the charge of Dashrath's cavalry was halted in its tracks and the mounted soldiers thrown forward as their horses suddenly collapsed under them. Lankan archers emerged, high on the walls of the Karachapa fort. They shot a continuous stream of arrows in a long arc from the fort ramparts right into the dense formation of Dashrath's troops at the back, ripping through the Saptarshi Sindhu lines. Many of Dashrath's warriors, who had been flung off their impaled horses, broke into a fierce hand-to-hand battle with their enemies. Their liege Dashrath led the way as he swung his sword furiously, killing all who dared to come in his path. But the Ayodhyan king was alive to the devastation being wrought upon his fellow soldiers, who rapidly fell under the barrage of Lankan arrows and superbly trained swordsmen. Dashrath ordered his flag-bearer, who was beside him, to raise the flag as a signal for the Saptarshi Sindhu warriors at the back to also break into a charge immediately and support the first line. But the things continued to deteriorate. The troops on the Lankan ships in the distance abruptly weighed anchor, extended the oars, and began to row rapidly to the beach, with their sails up at full mast to help them catch the wind. Within moments, arrows were being fired from the ships into the densely packed forces under Dashrath's command. The Lankan archers on the ships tore through the ranks of the Saptarshi Sindhus. No brigadier in Dashrath's army had factored in the possibility of the enemy ships beaching. It would have cracked their hulls. Unbeknownst to them, though, these were amphibious crafts built by Kuber's ingenious ship designers with specially constructed hulls that could absorb the shock of landing. Even as these landing craft stomped onto the beach with tremendous force, the broad bows of the hulls rolled out from the top. These were no ordinary bows of a standard hull. They were attached to the bottom of the hull by huge hinges which simply rolled out onto the sand like a landing ramp. This opened a gangway straight into the beach, disgorging cavalrymen of the Lankan army mounted on disproportionately large horses imported from the west. The cavalry rode out of the ships and straight onto the beach, mercilessly slicing into all who lay in their path. Even as he watched the destruction unleashed upon his forces near the fort, Dashrath's instincts warned him that something terrible was ensuing at the rear guard. As the Emperor stretched to gaze beyond the sea of frenzied battling humanity, he detected a quick movement to his left and raised his shield in time to block a vicious blow from a Lankan soldier. Screaming furiously, the king of Ayodhya brutally swung low at his attacker, his sword slicing through a chink in the armor. The Lankan fell back as his abdomen ripped open with a massive spurt of blood, accompanied by sleek pink intestines that tumbled out in a rush. Dashrath knew no mercy as he turned away from the poor sword, even as he bled to his miserable end. "No!" he yelled. What he saw was enough to break his mighty warrior's heart. Caught between the vicious pincer attack of the brutal Lankan archers and infantry at the Karachapa walls from the front and the fierce Lankan cavalry at the back, the spirit of his all-conquering army had all but collapsed. Dashrath stared at the scene he'd never imagined he would as the supreme commander of his glorious army. His men had broken rank and were in retreat. "No!" thundered Dashrath. "Fight! Fight! We are Ayodhya, the unconquerables!" Dashrath swung hard and decapitated a giant Lankan in one mighty blow. As he turned to face another of the seemingly never-ending waves of Ravan's hordes, his gaze fell upon the monster who was the mastermind of his devastation. Raavan, on horseback, was leading his cavalry down the beach on the left, skirting the sea. It was the only flank of the Lankans that was open to counterattack from the Ayodhya infantry. Accompanied by his well-trained cavalry, Raavan was shrieking maniacally and hacking his way brutally through the Ayodhya outer infantry lines before they could regroup. This was not a war anymore, it was a massacre. Dashrath knew that he'd lost the battle. He also knew that he'd rather die than face defeat. But he had one last wish. Redemption lay in his spitting on the dilapidated head of that ogre from Lanka. "Yeah!" screamed Dashrath as he hacked at the arm of a Lankan who jumped at him, severing the limb cleanly just above the wrist. Pushing his enemy out of the way, Dashrath lunged forward as he desperately tried to reach Raavan. He felt a shield crash into his calf and heard the crack of a bone above the taint. The mighty emperor of the Saptarshi Sindhu screamed as he spun around and swung his sword at the Lankan who had broken the rules of combat, decapitating him cleanly. He felt a hard knock on his back. He turned right back with a parry, but his broken leg gave way. As he fell forward, he felt a sharp thrust into his chest. Someone had stabbed him. He didn't feel the blade go in too deep, or had it gone in deeper than he thought? Maybe his body was shutting the pain out. Dashrath felt darkness enveloping him. His fall was cushioned by another soldier from among the heaving mass of warriors battling in close combat. As his eyes slowly closed, he whispered his last prayers within the confines of his mind to the god he revered the most, the sustainer of the world, the mighty sun god Surya himself. Don't let me live to bear this, Lord Surya. Let me die.